Welcome to Speaking of Grace, the weekly message podcast from the Whole Life Church in Orlando, Florida. We're a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-generational congregation committed to our mission of loving people into a lifelong friendship with God. We are committed to our vision of being a church without walls, fully engaged in serving the people of our community. Thank you for joining us as we continue Speaking of Grace.
Well, hey family, how's your summer been? Hot? I would say it's not been long enough. We are coming to an end of our summer party here at Whole Life. We've been doing a series of sermons on play because we believe that just like work, God intends for us to have time to play too. And we want to talk about what that looks like, what it means to play. And so today we're wrapping up the series. We have one more week. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just excited to begin getting to work in the next series, I guess. But no, let's not. And if you've noticed, every week we've tried to have a church activity that kind of goes along with whatever the sermon was about. So last week we preached about hobbies. And so this last Tuesday, we had a night where we had people showcasing their hobbies here at the church, and a lot of you came out for that, and it was super fun. Thanks for being a part of that. Week before that, we talked about laughter, and so we had SAC improv group that came here and did a night of fun and laughter. That was fantastic. And then tomorrow, we have Lake Day out at Bear Lake. So yeah, I hope you'll plan on being there. It's going to be a good time. And so I know what a few of you are thinking. You're thinking, well, I don't know, what is skiing and, nature, yeah, okay. But today I thought I'd just start off by talking about Jesus walking on water. Since we'll be doing some skiing tomorrow. Some of you got that, some of you are gonna think about it for a minute, and some of you are like, it's not really that funny, Ken. Today we're talking about nature. And in Mark chapter 6, near the end of the chapter, we find Jesus' disciples out on a lake, terrified because nature's gone crazy on them. There's a storm, their boat's being tossed all over the place. I don't know how many of you have been in a storm in a small boat. I have. It's not fun. It's terrifying. It's really scary. And these people are being tossed all over the lake, and they're terrified. And late at night, Jesus comes walking across the water, which, can we just all admit, if you're in a boat being tossed around on the water and you see somebody walking on water, that probably doesn't make things better. They're like, it's a ghost. And Jesus says, no, it's me. And the moment he gets on the boat, the storm evaporates. And Jesus said, why are you so afraid? And interestingly, Mark records that the disciples didn't get it. Because just before this, Jesus had fed 5,000 people with just a few loaves and fish. And Mark records that even after they watched the storm come to end, their hearts were hard. That's Mark's words, not mine. I'm not being judgmental. That's Mark being judgmental, so it's okay. He says our hearts were hard. Interesting. We're going to come back to that in a minute, but I want to back up a little bit in the story of Mark chapter 6. Early on in chapter 6 of the book of Mark, Jesus sends his disciples out on a missionary trip. It says he sends the 12 out 2 by 2. He sends them out and he says, hey, don't take anything with you. Just go and stay in people's place. I will let you take your sandals, but that's it. And they go out, they're on this missionary trip. It's hard work. It's busyness. I'm sure there are these moments of just amazing things, and there's other moments where they had these kind of low moments, I'm sure. But while this is all happening, something else is happening in another part of that area, and that's in Herod's palace. Because John the Baptist, who was very close with a number of Jesus' disciples and with Jesus himself, is being executed. Herod actually executes John while these disciples are off on their missionary trip. So when they get done with it, can you imagine what it was like to get back together? I don't know if you've ever been gone when somebody important in your life dies. For me, I had somebody that meant the world to me when I was in high school, and I was off selling books in Georgia when he passed away, and I drove 7 hours back to be at the funeral. And you get back, and there's all these mixed emotions because you've just had this incredible experiences selling books that I had had, and then the next thing you're there mourning somebody that you love. And so I can only imagine what the disciples were going through, and they come back, somebody that was meaningful in their life, in Jesus' life, has been murdered, and they're trying to sort through their emotions, they're trying to sort through the work they've been doing. And of course, Jesus said, hey guys, don't worry about your feelings. Get over it. I've only got a short amount of time left here. It's time to get back to work. Time is short. Get back to work. Don't worry about that. And there are a few of you in here who are looking at me like, I've read that story. I don't remember that part. That's because that's not there. It's not what happens. Jesus does something different. And I really want us to take a moment and think about this because Jesus' time was short, right? 3.5 years of ministry. That's not a lot of time. Any pastor will tell you I've been here for about 3 years. I feel like I'm just getting started. And Jesus' whole ministry, 3.5 years. So surely Jesus would say, it's not fun that John died, but don't worry, I'm the resurrection of life. He'll come back, and so just get over it. But he doesn't. Instead, this is what Jesus says. Let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going. Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat, so they left by boat for a quiet place. They left to get out into nature. They left to get into a place where they could have some solitude and some time in God's creation. They left their boat so they could be alone. There's something healing and regenerative about nature. There is something about nature that heals us, that speaks to us, and I believe it's because of the creator that created it. That creator speaks to us through nature. Paul says it this way, for ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. And that is not actually the text that I want, so we're not going to go with that one. Instead, we're going to go with a different verse, Romans 8, 20 through 22. For the creation... That was the text I wanted. Let's see if I can figure out how to do my job correctly. Well, somebody in the back help me out. Okay, here we go. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. Isn't that interesting? Paul basically says whether you have the Bible or don't have the Bible, you don't have an excuse for not knowing God. Because nature speaks to God. Nature reveals God. Nature is not God, but nature is used by God to help us as human beings know who God is. I have to tell you, I grew up in the sticks. This is me a couple years ago. I'm not the one with the diaper. That's my brother. I didn't ask for permission to show this picture, but I'm sure he'll be okay with that. Man, it was a different time and place. We would go play outside all day long. This mud puddle to me this picture is like the visual reminder for me of my childhood, and it was a happy one. And we grew up in North Carolina. On one side of me is this big field that you can't see. We catch fireflies, butterflies. Of course, we treated them ethically. It was a different time in a different place. And just had a blast doing that. A few years after this picture was taken, we moved to another house that was out in the middle of the woods, mountain back behind our house. My brother and I would run all over that mountain all the time. Something that I don't think kids are allowed to do anymore because I don't know There may have been a couple times we nearly died, but whatever. We didn't. And just as a little bit of a side note, one of the things, I've just started a book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And in The Anxious Generation, Jonathan suggests that one of the reasons why we've seen a massive spike in anxiety and depression in young people and adults as well, but especially within our adolescents, is because they are spending so much more time with screens than they are outside. And because as parents, we tend to be so protective that we don't give them the chance to make a few mistakes and learn a few things. And I think that there has to be probably a balance in there. As a parent, you have to figure what that is. But there is something powerful about connecting kids with nature. And even a social psychologist that I don't know that he's a Christian will tell you that kids need more time outside playing in nature. So because of that background, I still to this day feel very connected to the mountains in North Carolina. Again, another picture just taken a few weeks ago. Okay, that wasn't true. Let's try one of my favorite pictures of me, because those mountains, those are mine. I don't own them, but I feel like I should. It's where I grew up. It's home. It's happiness. It's whenever I feel down and I feel the need to reconnect with God in a special way, this is my place. It's up on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and it's a place that I go and just feel that reconnection with God. And so oftentimes when we have those things, like Jesus, I would say to the staff here at Whole Life, hey, let's go take a retreat for a little while. And so a couple years ago, I took the staff up to where I grew up in North Carolina. This is a picture of us just after we went tubing down the French Broad. It was a great time. And during that, we were staying at a retreat, a Christian retreat that has a lot of trails up the mountain. And one morning, Rochelle and I got up and we said, hey, we're going to go on a hike. Anybody want to come with us? And look at that big group. How many people do you think we got to come with us? One. Right there. Sylvia came with us. Sylvia, are you here? Maybe not. Okay, that's too bad. All right, well, I've been waiting for 3 years to tell this story for her. I promised it, or 2 years, something like that. So anyway, so Sylvia says, I'm going to go on a hike with you. And we're like, that's awesome. So cool that, Sylvia wants to hang out with two old people. This is fantastic. So she's doing great. She's on the hike. She's bouncing around. She's a little bit ahead of us, not too far, Stanley. It wasn't really that far ahead of us. She's just a little bit ahead of us, just a little bit. And she goes around this turn, and we see her stop, and we're still walking. She stops, and we hear her say, bear. Big bear. And she's kind of frozen there, and I just come up next to her, and sure enough, there is a big bear about 20 yards ahead of us. And just one of those awkward moments, because I know I'm the only guy there, which means I'm the one that gets eaten. So what do? I grew up in the woods, so I know what to do. So we do the right thing. We kind of slowly back up. The bear ambles off on his happy way. He's happy and full. But it was this moment of that realization that not everything in nature is safe. And so we talk about how, nature, we connect with God, but there's also those moments in nature we think, well, what kind of God does that? I mean, that's what this guy said, right? Charles Darwin, when he looked at nature, he looked at it and saw it completely differently than the psalmist saw it. He looked and he said, there's horrible things happening here. There's bears that will eat you. There's awful things. There's wasps that lay their larvae inside a caterpillar, and then that larva eats through the caterpillar while it's still alive. I mean, what kind of God does that? And I think it's often tempting as a pastor, when you talk about nature, just to dwell on those beautiful verses and to let Charles do his own thing, because, we don't want to talk about Charles Darwin too much in a Christian church. And yet I think we do a disservice to ourselves if we don't acknowledge there are some really, really ugly things in nature. There's sometimes when we look at nature that maybe Charles Darwin isn't necessarily so far off base to go, what's going on here? And maybe we need to come to different conclusions, but maybe we can understand the people that struggle with nature. They say, I know you see God in there, but when I see that, I don't know. It makes me question. And what will generally happen is a pastor like myself will say when somebody says that to me, I'll say, well, let's look at Romans 8. For creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in the hope that creation itself would also be set free from slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. In other words, when Adam sinned, it introduced sin into this world. Because of us, this world really groans with pain and suffering. And there's some awful things that happen in nature because of sin. And Charles Darwin goes, yeah, but. And there's some of our friends, some friends that I have that say, okay, Ken, that's fine. You put that little thing up there and let that give you hope. That doesn't change things for me. And can I just for a moment say, could we be okay as Christians sometimes living in tension? I feel like sometimes as Christians, we feel like if we don't have an answer for every objection that somehow we've failed. And I want to suggest to you, sometimes it's okay to sit in silence and say, I don't know. You make an interesting point. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know. I think that goes a lot further than making up some kind of crazy answer that's easily refuted by the scientific community. Maybe it's just better to say, you know what? There's some things that we believe by faith. And you have your faith in one thing, I have my faith in another. I would love for you to have the faith that I have because I've found peace in it. How's that working for you? In the kindest way possible, you say that. Not the way I said it. How's that working for you? Where's your peace at? So I just want to sit here and acknowledge that sometimes when you look at nature, there are going to be some things that you see that will say, I don't know how a loving God's okay with this happening or letting it happen. And maybe those are moments to sit in the tension and say, but maybe there's still something there that I can learn about God. A God that brings beauty out of ashes. A God that takes the ugly and promises to someday make it beautiful. And that maybe part of my life does have to be a life of faith. Maybe there isn't an answer for everything. And yet, throughout the majority of nature, I see God's handiwork. And it leads me to believe. It leads me to see God even when there are things there that I can't exactly explain. And maybe like the psalmist, we say, the heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day, they continue to speak. Night after night, they make him known. They speak without word or sound. Their voice is never heard, yet their message has gone throughout the earth and their words to the world. So family, when was the last time you tried to listen to God speaking to you in nature? When was the last time you intentionally stepped outside your door? Or maybe if it was super hot, you turned on your TV and turned on a nature program and said, where is God here? How do I hear God's word speaking to me without a word? Where do I see God working? Is there something still small, a still small voice that's working here? You know, as my daughter and I were driving to church this morning, we were talking about the sermon, and she said, I told her what I'm about to do, and she said, Dad, did you know that I just took general psychology, and that they have determined that people who just look at pictures of nature for a few minutes a day are more grounded, less anxious, and happier. Just looking at pictures of nature, if they spend just, I think, 3 to 5 minutes. So what do you think, family? Would you be okay with me showing you some pictures I've taken of some of my favorite places in nature for a few minutes? And what I'd like to ask, and I know this is a hard one, but I'd love for us to be as quiet as we can so that God can speak to us, and maybe we can hear God's voice saying to us, something to us through these pictures. Can we do that for just a few minutes? All right. O Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe display. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art.
Hi, this is Randy McGray, podcast producer and host here at Whole Life Church. Loving people into a lifelong friendship with God is our mission at the Whole Life Church, and our podcasts are designed to help facilitate conversations that help us grow together in that pursuit. Now that you've heard the message for this week, don't forget to check out the Whole Life takeaways for this message. Swipe up in today's show notes and join the conversation. Speaking of conversations, each Wednesday morning we take a closer look at the week's message. That's right, the one you just listened to. We discuss practical ways to apply spiritual lessons and ask honest questions about the issues we face as Christians, all focused through the lens of grace. Your voice is a welcomed addition to that conversation. We encourage your thoughts and your questions by sending a voicemail or text to 407-965-1607 or send an email to podcast@wholelife.church. You can find everything podcast related on our website, wholelife.church/podcast. And plan on spending every Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning with us as we bring you the Whole Life Church inspiration you love straight into your headphones. Thanks for listening and have a great week.